All right, well, we're here with NerdFellas. I'm Suhail Borzlan, and this is
Mike Wanted.
And today we're going to be doing a review on Old Man Logan, or Logan, as some of you guys might know them both as.
Logan.
And,
Such a coffee.
Tearjerker, pulling on them heartstrings. So, what did you like about the movie?
I hated the. No, I'm just playing. That movie was awesome. I guess you can't really ask me what I liked, like in general, because I loved the movie overall. But
right.
I don't know. What do you think?
Well, let's retract. What would you rate the movie as for you? How many stars?
Everyone knows I like rating out of 5. How do you feel?
5 is
out of 5, but 5 is too high. But do you like 5 or 10?
I like 5.
Okay, so if I rated it out of 5, oof, it's pretty damn close. I'm gonna just give it a 4.5.
You know, that's what I was thinking,
Yeah.
and I feel like for a few like real, it's hard to be nitpicky of this movie because I really did like it, and I think a 4.5 would be pretty fair.
So if y'all are familiar, a lot of the ways we like to do reviews is discussion. We'll go ahead and get into spoilers a little bit later, but we'll warn you ahead of time. But right now we'll just give you our general thoughts on the film itself. So now you know our rating is about a 4.5, so we kind of agreed on that. I say it's one of the best, if not the best, X-Men movie made thus far.
Period.
I don't think it's going to be topped. You can't get it. I mean,
No.
and it's definitely better than Deadpool, because Deadpool is comedy. It's something expected. We've seen Hugh Jackman in this role for 17 years now.
But would we be seeing this movie if we didn't get a Deadpool?
I would say no. I mean, it's definitely something that contributed to the fact that it got that R rating.
Right.
But I will say they've been wanting an R-rated film since The Wolverine came out. They wanted it before Deadpool, but studios would not approve it until Deadpool came along.
So the success of that rated R movie kind of paved the way for this one to come through.
Oh yeah, and then especially seeing other R-rated films like Blade, or even Jackass, Kick-Ass.
Right.
But
right, yeah.
you know, stuff like that kind of just paved the way to finally get this hero that's been in the PG-13 community for so long that we finally get to see the real Wolverines.
Right, and this definitely plays to a more mature audience that sometimes, you know, it's not just about appealing to a young audience for superheroes. You know, you want to get those diehard fans that really love not necessarily the gory aspect of, you know, what comes along with being a superhero,
But the maturity level of it.
Right.
Because, I mean, a lot of these fans have grown up with it since they were kids.
Right.
So the fandom is older. So it's like, well, let's tailor it to them now.
Exactly.
And, you know, I'm not going to lie. When I went to the theater, there were parents bringing in their kids, and I kind of cringed at the thought of that.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, there's little, you know, like 5-6-year-old girls walking in, and I'm like, well, if they want X-23 to be their role model.
Well, sweetie, this is really what Wolverine's like. So.
So this is what you get. And, you know, a lot of the kids walked out totally fine. I think a lot of them have been kind of desensitized to the whole thing. But, I mean, the movie, yeah, great modern day Western,
Yes.
you know. And James Mangold, I mean, he has a good hit and miss track record, but he's done like Copland, he's done Walk the Line. So, and he even did the Wolverine, and, you know, he's for the Wolverine, it kind of failed for me at the end, and that's what I was fearful of with Logan.
Right.
But once Logan delivered its little surprise that we'll talk about later with the other bad guy, I was like, oh wow. And I thought I was going to hate it, but I actually loved it. And it was a nice wrap up to the whole story of Wolverine, Logan, and for Hugh Jackman.
Yeah, it definitely put a good stamp on his character. I mean, it's one of those things where you're never going to have anybody play this role as good as he is.
Nope. Never.
Nobody. And it was a good way to send his character off into the sunset, so to speak.
Yeah, and that's the way it should have probably ended, because they kind of based it on an old Western that they were actually watching in the film. But, and I can't even think of the name right now of that film, but just seeing how he kind of, well, I guess we'll get into spoilers now if you're...
Spoiler alert.
So spoiler alert, because now it's going to get a little bloody. So give us your thoughts overall. How about a synopsis of how it went down?
Well, it kind of gives you, if you've read the comic, it kind of gives you a sense as, we'll get into some comparisons, but you you get this this version of Wolverine who he's really got nothing left, but his counterpart Xavier and Caliban, and it's just kind of living your life a little strung out. You're at the tail end of your life, and he's trying to get to a sense of security because they haven't had this in a long time. They're barely scraping by. They want to save up money for this boat so they can go live the rest of their life in peace and not have to worry about interference from the government or whatnot, any antagonists.
Yep.
And along the way, they come into contact with this female who has this little girl with them who they don't know, who turns out to be X-23, and so it kind of starts playing into the whole family aspect as we never really had this thing, and who knew that. To their life that they've been lacking this whole time was family.
Yeah.
And you really get a sense of that in this film, I think.
And I think that's kind of the big factor is family and closure. And for Wolverine, I've always thought it was interesting because he has always struggled with himself because of the things he's done. He's lived a long life, almost 100 years, more than that. And he's never really had a sense of family other than the X-Men, His father figure was Charles Xavier.
Right.
And his brothers and sisters, although he was in love with Jean, but they were, Cyclops, everyone, Beast, like his brother, all of them. And as the movie gets deeper into it, you realize how he lost his family, the tragedy of it. And it's just the movie is relentless. It just delivers blow after blow after blow, and your heart just slowly breaks throughout the whole movie until you finally get to that ending, and we'll discuss that later too. But he even called it in the first films. Like if you watch the first X-Men, he was talking to like Charles and telling him, are you or even the other X-Men, are you sure you're on the right side? There's going to be a war. It's going to end badly.
Right.
Whose side are you going to be on?
Right.
He always knew it was going to end badly, and that's the way it went. And that's very tragic because you tried so hard to make it work, and it just never did.
Right,
and that's
right.
the sadness of it.
One thing that I thought was really unique, and I think that sets Xavier apart from, all the other X-Men, is his sense of empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what really drives his character in this movie, was his sense of empathy for caring for all of those around him, yet he had this, disease in his mind that was basically debilitating him to the point where he had to be taking medication. And spoiler alert, he ends up being the one that destroyed many human lives, many mutant lives. And so for a lot of reasons, I think that's also what kind of played into the role of his mental illness.
Yeah, and and I think also maybe it was something he didn't expect because, touching on his level of empathy, he's always tried to protect, and his school in Westchester was a safe haven for all mutants, and he never wanted to fight. He wanted to coexist, and it didn't work out that way. And I feel like if he knew he was a danger, he would have left. He would have just gone somewhere. And I feel like maybe one day something just went off, like a brain aneurysm. It just happened, and he couldn't stop it. No one knew where it was coming from, so there was not enough time to react. And Logan discovered it. He was the only one that could regenerate in time to stop him.
Right.
And he just was too late. So
yeah.
And that's what's touched on. It's not directly said, but Professor X basically, for a long time. And even at the beginning, Professor X says, "What did you do, Logan? What did you do?" So it's hinting that maybe Logan did something, which is a nod to Old Man Logan.
Right.
And Old Man Logan, if you read the series, from Wizard magazine back in the day, that's what Old Man Logan looked like. Very brutal comic. And this movie's largely based on it. Granted, they couldn't touch on a lot of the Marvel characters, but
right.
Logan was the one who took out all the X-Men.
Right.
And it was because Mysterio, a familiar bad guy with Spider-Man, made everyone look like a bad guy, a villain. And Wolverine went crazy with his berserker rage and killed everyone, and only to realize that he was holding the dead body of Jubilee, and seeing Beast and Cyclops, everyone was dead. and he even tried killing himself. He put his head on a railroad,
right,
and a train ran over his head, and when he came back, he couldn't do anything about it. You know?
Right.
So he vowed to never pop his claws again, and some of that element works because he's not afraid to pop his claws. He still goes crazy. He's in this film. We find him in a bad place. He's an alcoholic. Right. And I mean, it's even interesting because I think they kind of touched on not popping the claws, because when he first pops his claws, one of them gets stuck.
Right.
So I was like,
it almost implies that he hasn't used them in quite a while.
Exactly. And it's sad because the biggest thing for him at this point in his life, I mean, he had a huge purpose when he was with the X-Men, and now when we find him, his main purpose is to protect the limousine.
Right.
You know, because he has a limousine business, you know, and he's in El Paso. He's doing quinceañeras, he's doing, you know, his weddings, and it's so sad. And even some of the opening scenes, it made me think about how the movie is kind of tapped into like the political climate now with immigration.
Right.
You know, and I mean, I can go on a rant for forever about this, but
I mean, you know, you definitely get that hint of, especially with everything that's been going on now. You couldn't help but think that was a slight, you know, political implication there when in the movie, you know, they have people chanting against immigrants, and especially in the area that we're in, you know, with that nice nod to it being El Paso, but couldn't help but think that there was a subtle little political jab there. You know, kind of bridging the gap between how we were saying that Charles Xavier has this strong sense of empathy, and you kind of get to understand that more in depth. You know, if you ever saw Days of Future Past, you know, when he sees his future self, he tells him, you know, if you ever think that you're afraid of all of these, you know, other people's fears, you know, and you take that into your heart and you kind of hold that, that's going to make you more powerful than you can ever imagine.
Yep.
And I think that was his burden of his life, you know, holding all these people's worries and troubles in his own self. And so we already know that he's pretty empathetic, but what this movie plays to is kind of like showing that Logan never really had this side of him.
Maybe even more so that he had it with Professor X and he's kind of lost it.
Right, and so you definitely get that sense of father-son type of relationship with them both, as you know, in the movie they allude to it, you know, they joke around, they say, well, this is my dad, Chuck, you know, you know, so you get a sense of closeness between them. But as far as caring for others, I mean, the only one that you really can tell that Wolverine had some sense of, you know, feelings for, as far as, you know, whether it was you know, from like a fatherly figure, was Rogue, you know, throughout the past movies. But you know, he never really had an attachment to anybody else in a more intimate sense. But throughout this movie, you know, you have exchanges between him and Charles, and you know, when they're in the hotel, you know, Charles is saying, you know, this is what it feels like, to have some sort of feeling for others other than yourself. And towards the end, you know, he's like, okay, well, this is what it feels like. So it's almost kind of implied that, okay, well, this is what death really feels like. Right. Also,
that's the second part I took from it.
Right. So I have a sense of, oh, this is the end for me, but also this is what it feels like to have a love for someone when X-23 is calling him daddy. And that was one of the tear-jerking moments of the
I mean, there are two big moments that choked me up, you know, and we can touch back on that later. But
that, like I was saying, you know, that was for me a more pivotal like stamp on the character of Wolverine, is that he's endured so much pain because of how long he's lived. He's had, you know, I would say multiple loves of his life, you could say, and yet, you know, he really had no sense of attachment because of his prolonged life. And so I could definitely say that, you know, he never really had someone that was like, I'm going to give up my life for. Until the very end. Especially
since he never could, you know, literally, right. You know.
So
that was tough.
It was a really unique transition of empathy from one character who is known for that kind of characteristic, and kind of passing that on to Logan as a character, which I thought was really unique.
That was very unique. And then, I mean, even just seeing like that state he was in, you know, only caring about, and you know, not necessarily caring, but struggling with taking care of Xavier.
Right.
You know, I mean, that's tough. And you can show, and you know, we meet Caliban, the albino mutant, and he's a tracker, and he's very highly intelligent. But I mean, Caliban initially, we don't see it in the film, but he was a bad guy at some point.
Right.
and you can see the resentment from Logan. He doesn't care. He sought out Caliban's help to help with Xavier, but he kind of just shuns him too. He just has this wall,
right?
You know, and it's even more sad because, you know, once we see that one woman come and say, "I need your help," he says, "No, I'm not Wolverine. I'm not that guy. Don't ask for my help." You know?
Right.
And he's willing to abandon anyone that needs help, and it's sad because he doesn't care anymore. You know,
right.
It's just about, I need to take care of Xavier. I can't let him remember, giving him his pills. You know, whatever. And I mean, that was pretty sad. But seeing, and even all the way to the very end of the film, you know, you don't see his transition until the very end, really.
Right.
I mean, even when he's finally at the last moment where he's taking X-23 to this, you know, secret hiding spot, whatever, to meet with the other New Mutants. I mean, he still doesn't care, you know? But he does deep inside, we know, and he's just trying so hard to fight it. And I think it's something he's fought with his whole life. But
and I think it's just things that he has control over and things that he doesn't want to have control over because he doesn't want to complicate things. And you know, you see that when they come in, the Reavers come in and they try and take the little girl, and he's still willing to abandon this little girl for Charles Xavier. And I think that goes to show as, you know, part of the transition. You know, he has this one person that he knows he cares about and wants to take care of. He's willing to kind of push everybody aside.
Yeah, and then I seeing even like not just the father dynamic, but even the grandfather dynamic between X-23 and Patrick Stewart.
Right.
I mean, that was interesting because that was her only real way of speaking clearly with someone, you know, telepathically. I mean, she didn't have that power, but you know, Xavier was talking to her, and he was the only one that was showing empathy and saying, "No, you're welcome. Come eat. Come into our home." And Logan was just trying his best to push her away. And I mean, that girl, she was a great actress, man.
Oh,
I mean, it must have taken a long time to find someone that could fight, know Spanish, have a gymnastics background. I mean, it was a very limited supply of casting.
That crying scene at the end gave me flashbacks of, you know, Russell Crowe and his, you know, snot running and his tears, you know, from the Gladiator. And you can't help but feel those type of emotions too. It was real good.
So what kind of connections can we make to Old Man Logan, the comic book?
Well, first off, I mean, he only goes by Logan. He doesn't consider himself Wolverine anymore.
Right. Big one.
To that himself is that, and I think that's real apparent, you know, when only one claw comes out. He's not used to drawing the claws anymore. He's worn down. His body doesn't work the same anymore. He's only making money, which, I mean, he was more of a nomad kind of going throughout his life, you know, just kind of passing from one life to another, and now he's
slowly healing.
And he's just set in this one mode and trying to set off to sea.
And one of the scenes, like with coming back to that slow healing, was, you know, you don't really see the damage until, I mean, 2 opening scenes of he pops his claws when I, you know, kind of funny to El Paso, but Cholos are trying to steal his tires, his rims in El Paso, and they even mentioned it was off 54, you know, not too far.
Yeah.
But you know, he pops his claws and only one of them comes out halfway and the others come out the correct way. So you see, well, he hasn't used them in a while. And after he gets shot at, he's in the restroom and he's slowly shooting these bullets out of his body, but he's scarred up. So I mean, he's not in a good place. He's limping all the time too. I mean, he's done. He knows he's dying too.
Right.
So I mean, there's that connection of, and he actually has a different name in the movie, James something. I can't remember what his fake name was.
Right.
But he says, "Call me James." Other connections. I mean, the one connection that didn't even click to me that you mentioned at the farmhouse.
Okay. So, if you've read the Old Man Logan comic book, it takes place far into the future,
way past 2029, where Logan takes place.
Right. And so he's basically, like we were saying, you know, he killed all the previous X-Men. He's kind of hanging up his mantle, so to speak, and he's living on a farm, you know, with a wife who in the comic, by the way, is a ginger. So it's kind of playing he still has that feel for gingers. Side rant.
He does. Yeah.
So you know, he's there with his wife and kid. And who is a girl, by the way, so that's a little bit of a nod to X-Men 2 being female, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, he's living on a ranch. He's basically having a hard time. You got the whole family who's basically taking advantage of this whole area.
And the Hulk family in the comic book, just a little background, the Incredible Hulk is now a bad guy, and he owns pretty much the west coast of the United States.
Right.
And through him and She-Hulk, they've had a bunch of Hulks. So now the Hulk clan is in charge, and they just give hell to Logan.
Right, and so you kind of get a sense of this comparison. It's not, it's one of those things where they make a nod to it, when they go and stay with this man and his family after saving their horses out on the road. And again, this family itself is having problems. They have people who take advantage of the land. They give them a hard time. So in the movie, they find out their water's shut off, and they go to try and set it back on, and then these group of farmers who own the land tell them that they need to leave, and they don't care. They have no empathy. They have no regard for the people that live there, and this is kind of like a comparison of the Hulk family, and it was kind of flipped. Yeah. But I still give a nod to it.
That was awesome, and it never clicked to me, but I kept feeling it. I was like, there's something familiar about this, and it killed me. But yeah, that family was what Logan's family was in the comic book, so it was interesting. And then the Hulks were those farmers. Another thing is, the whole element of the comic book itself was smuggling something. So in the comic book, Wolverine or Logan needs money to pay the Hulks before they take his land. So none other than one of the last surviving heroes, Hawkeye, who's now blind, comes to Wolverine and says, I need to smuggle some drugs, and you'll get this much money, and we just need to go across the country and do it. And same concept, exactly. His partner in crime is Xavier instead of Hawkeye, and they're smuggling X-23 to Canada.
Right.
So that's another nice little nod to it. So they took a lot of it.
And a little bit of that too, if you read the comic, spoiler alert, the actual drug that they're transporting is the same superhero serum that they used to make Captain America.
Right.
And so they get to this place, which also could be conceived as Eden, because it's a place of regrowth and, trying to create this army of superheroes to take back the world.
Yeah.
So if you kind of think of it, in comparison to this movie, X-23 basically becomes the future. She's joined a group of her fellow clones, as you could kind of look at it, of these new children with powers, and they're pretty much shown to be the future.
Mm-hmm. They become the New Mutants, and it's hinted because there's a lot of, there's not many, which is I thought was great, but there's enough Easter eggs to kind of tie in the other X-Men films. And Richter was the leader of this small clan of kids, and Richter's actually a leader of the New Mutants in the comic books.
In the comic book, they kind of travel through Las Vegas as part of the journey, and a big part of this, as far as the comic book goes, this was like the last stand, the last place that this big fight of mutants against bad people took place, and so they kind of give another nod to that. They travel through a casino, and
that's where we kind of witness Xavier's, his epileptic seizure thing that happened, and that's when we see he freezes everyone, and we kind of see the scope of how big this incident can happen.
Right.
So once they escort him out, and you see all these people on the floor, he's apologizing, and it hints. What did he do? Right,
and you almost feel like he's said this before, and he knows the feeling of this type of seizure on a much grander scale than just the casino that it seems to be affecting. And that goes into one of the other, probably the most major comparison, is that in the comic book, Wolverine was the one that killed all the X-Men. Yep. Pretty much set everything in motion. There wasn't anybody to defend the world from all the main antagonists, all the main villains. But in the movie, it's almost implied that Xavier was the one that killed all the past mutants.
Yeah, and they refer to it as the Westchester incident, where Xavier's school for mutants was, and seeing how apologetic he was, and the way he basically says as much as he can before his final moments, but he was saying how they had a nice dinner with this family that they were with. And he's going to sleep, and he's saying, this was one of the best nights. And you kind of get a hint, this is going to be one of his last moments.
Right.
Where is this leading to? And he starts trying to say he remembers what he did and how catastrophic it was. and how bad he feels, because he for a long time was blaming it on Logan.
Right.
And and at first for even the audience were like, oh, Logan did something.
Right.
That's why he's so drunk and all, And then we realized it was Xavier. He had one of these incidents, and he killed the X-Men. He killed anyone that was in the school, so kids and the X-Men.
Right, and I thought it was real interesting too is that the medicine that Logan was giving Xavier was not only to help prevent these seizures and whatnot, but it almost seems like he was also helping him not only cope but kind of forget about it. Mm-hmm. It was a means to kind of help him not remember.
Yeah.
Because the way he was dealing with it was through drinking alcohol, but he still felt all that pain was still very real with him.
Yeah. And then he for a while he stopped taking those pills, so he started remembering.
Right.
And that was his plan the whole time. He had stopped because he was trying to communicate with X-23, because Logan wanted nothing to do with it.
Right.
And it was all Xavier's doing of maybe his own personal redemption to save the future. Because he killed what could have been the future.
Yeah.
And that was sad altogether. But that's where we get into like some of the emotional stuff. So I guess we can kind of. Was there anything else with Old Man Logan that we can compare? There's still a ton of things that we can pretty much talk about, but they're very different, and a lot of the elements from the comic book were taken to make what is Logan.
Right.
And Logan was still. It was still amazing. It was awesome.
Yeah, I guess the final thing you could say is that it's in the comic, the world are run by the most well-known villains. You got the Kingpin, who finally takes over Nevada, which was previously taken over by Magneto. Mm-hmm. You have the California territory, which was the Hulk, and then you have basically the Washington area, which is
Red
taken
Skull.
over by the Red Skull, who's the president in the comic book.
Yeah.
So in this sense, you kind of get like from the Reavers and this Transigen. It's not necessarily mutant based, but there's a lot of heavy mutant implications with it, and they're still pretty much in charge of everything. So to speak, because they're basically raising an army.
And a lot of it seems business as usual. Everything seems to be running normally, except with the lack of mutants. And there's just these government conspiracies going on, and the only real ones that know about it, like with Transigen,
right.
and it's something that seems like it's a large scope, but almost under the radar.
Right.
Because they're just like secret government agents trying to get some mutants and kill off mutants, and basically their whole arc in this story is to recover the mutants that these nurses helped escape, including X-23.
Right.
So that's their whole arc in the story, and Logan's just drawn into it, and he loses a lot of people along the way. And it's sad because the whole time he thought Caliban was dead.
Yeah.
And he was obviously upset, and it was great to see. There's no such thing as a small part, at least in this film.
Right.
And Caliban, as short as his screen time was, he was very important to the story.
Yes.
And his redemption scene was amazing too.
Oh yeah. Well, throughout the whole movie, you still think that he was a bad guy, and they kind of play on that emotion, like you were always bad. You don't have to keep protecting these people, but he was still protecting them to a degree, because in the movie implied that he was only tracing them slow enough to kind of keep them ahead of them.
Exactly. And then in that final moment at the farmhouse where all the shit goes down, that's where Caliban finally redeems himself, and he sets off some grenades. He's caged up, and boom, kills everyone in that. But the biggest surprise comes in one of the most emotional moments when Professor Xavier is finally realizing what he did, only to get stabbed by Wolverine through the chest.
Right.
He turns around and sees Wolverine, and Wolverine just sticks his claws in his chest, and everyone in the audience is like, what the hell is going on? Because it's obviously Wolverine. And then you find out it's a clone. And it was hinted at the very beginning of the film. X-24 was this huge experiment.
Right.
So that was intense.
And another thing that you pointed out that I thought was real interesting was the similarities on how they styled that version of the Wolverine clone on this.
Yeah, he had the short trimmed hair,
right?
And just like you see in this, he had this whole beard thing going. And when he first came on screen, I was like, man, he looks familiar. You know, I mean, besides of course, obviously being Hugh Jackman.
Right.
But I'm like, what? And it was the same style based on Old Man Logan. You know, minus the gray hair because he was a younger clone.
Right.
But man, that he was intense. Now this was, and it was interesting because this clone. It's basically, you know, at first when they said he's a clone and he just shows up out of nowhere,
right.
I'm like, oh, come on, please don't ruin the movie for me. Like, I wanted it to be worth something. Like, I didn't want it to be another overblown, just random. I don't know. I was worried, and there's a metaphor in it where it's Logan facing his true self, what he was meant to always be. You know, and
a killing machine.
You know, that's what he was made to be, and he's facing off against himself. You know, and you know, when you think about it that way, going into the movie, you're like, wow, like this is even deeper. There's so many layers to this film, and it all just kind of unravels in this pivotal moment at the farm.
Yeah, I mean, you have a guy that even at the very end, he couldn't escape himself.
Yeah, and then it's brutal. I mean, this family that took them in, gone. Just slaughtered by this Wolverine.
Literally slaughtered.
Yeah, and you know, it's more shocking when Professor Xavier gets stabbed, but the emotion comes when X-23 is being dragged off and Logan doesn't even want to save her. He wants to know what happened to
Right, he runs back upstairs to go check on Charles
and what made me like start kind of like feeling this emotion was when he was like, it wasn't me, like he's trying to tell him it's not me, you know, and I'm like, oh God, this is horrible, you know, and what a horrible way for him to go. And I kept trying to remember what his final words were to Logan. Like, I heard him say, this is our boat or something, like about the truck.
Right.
And then he said, save her, I think was the last thing he said.
Yes.
And then he lost it. And that's when we finally see him face off against his clone. And man, that battle's crazy.
Right. Yeah, no, that was a very strong emotional part because even through all that, he's still trying to push Wolverine in the right direction.
Yep. And he's always tried to do that. And you know, he was bitter at the beginning of the film too because he's been drugged up this whole time by Logan and he doesn't know why. So he's telling him he's horrible and why is he doing it and what did he do, and you know, he finally gets himself back despite having to face these seizures. You know, he's also kind of redeemed himself by succeeding in trying to save X-23,
right, but
also trying to get Logan back on the path that he tried getting him on from the very beginning. So I mean, that was interesting too. But even X-23's reaction, seeing his dead body in the trunk of the car, that was...
I mean, it's like losing her grandfather.
Yeah, she just lost her grandfather, you know? She's never had a real family. She has this picture she carries of her mutant friends, you know, and you know, that's the closest sense of family she's ever had. And if we haven't mentioned it before, X-23 is Wolverine's daughter, based on their DNA, I guess.
Yeah.
So a clone of him. And it was interesting knowing, in the comics, she had claws come out of her feet, which her choreography and fight scenes were so amazing. And when they popped out, I was like, yes, because that's in the comic. And I was like, yes. And I liked how Professor Xavier mentioned that's a female trait in your type of mutant. And I was like, wow, that's so cool. I mean, the part that really choked me up was when Logan buries Xavier.
Right.
And it you know, he's burying him and you don't see X-23. And when he's finally done, Logan tries to say, like, he's trying to think of a eulogy or something, and and it's a nice place. You can see it's a forest, it's by the river, so he's trying to say, well, at least he has some water, and then he stops because he can't think of anything else to say. And when he starts tearing up, and then X-23 holds his hand, that's when I teared up, my wife just started laughing at me because she knows I cry when it's very emotional, so I was like, whatever. And I'm trying to hide my tears because there's a whole crowd of people, but in the audience you hear people go.
You hear a couple of those sniffles, and it's like, no.
And honestly, if it was me by myself, I think I would have just straight out bawled, in all honesty. But yeah, I mean, that was very interesting, and
you still get that from when. How much it meant to Logan to lose such a pivotal person in his life, such an important person. He still wasn't really ready to give in to that side of him to care for others. Mm-hmm. As you notice, he lets X-23 hold his hand for a bit and grab his hand, but after a way, he throws her hand away and he goes and unleashes hell on his
beats
poor
the crap
truck.
on the truck.
And it just really goes to show how much admiration he had for somebody who took a chance on him. Mm-hmm. to the very end, never gave up on him.
Yeah, and then, I mean, he never gave up on anyone. I mean, going back to the films, he never gave up on Magneto, his mortal enemy, you know, at least to Magneto's perspective. But I think if you took the element of Xavier out of the film, there'd be no hope or ray of light in this film, in all honesty. Because he's the one that's pushing for the good.
Right.
And if it wasn't for him, Logan would put that adamantium bullet in his head.
Right.
And X-23 would still be in the custody of those bad guys. So,
that's right.
So losing him was important to the story too, because now it's up to Wolverine to complete what his father figure wanted, you know. And I thought it was hilarious how, I mean, and this is actually where we find out what's wrong with Wolverine, you know?
Yeah.
We're wondering, why is he so weak? Why is he dying, you know?
I thought it was cancer, but I mean, he can heal himself, go figure, right?
Right.
I come up probably the worst idea.
Well, I couldn't even think of it, you know? And you know, he hands him at the doctor. He passes out from, you know, just being so tired. And we find out X-23 actually stole a truck and drove him to a doctor, so that was awesome. But the doctor straight up says, you know, there's something wrong, we can cure you. And he says, I already know what's wrong. And I was like you. I was like, what? Is it cancer?
At that point, you know, I thought it might have been like some poison. And I started thinking back to the past Wolverine, that maybe he still had some remnants of that poison.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what was actually slowing his healing down. But when you really think of it, I mean, Xavier describes his healing ability as a muscle.
Yeah.
And so as time proceeds on, it's going to eventually start to atrophy. And
yep. And then it turns out it was the adamantium all along. I mean, it was just it was destroying him from the inside out. So
just before his body could heal it and withstand it, which is why he was the only one that could.
And then another thing that, I mean, the main bad guy was actually Stryker's son. You know, he doesn't get revealed till halfway through the movie. And we realize he's the one that created X-23 and all these other mutants. You know?
Right, I mean, you get a glimpse of him, but you don't really know who he is.
Yeah, we don't know who this guy is. And we see him arguing with the other guy. I can't remember his name.
I can't.
But when he finally comes in, you know, he's talking so nicely to Caliban and saying, you know, you were so good to us, you can be an asset. And you get a sense that he really thinks he's doing good, you know. And everyone knows he's not. You know, he's getting rid of mutants, and he's experimenting on them and making better weapons. You know?
Right. So
a new Weapon X program. But that was interesting to see, and he's pretty sinister. Very sinister.
Extremely.
So hopefully we see Mr. Sinister later on, but we did not see him in this film, sadly.
Right, so you know, after all this, we finally transition to, you know, Wolverine gets this little X-23 to her goal, which are the coordinates that they find in this comic book. And
that's what actually set off Wolverine in the first place. He was upset because he realized these coordinates were fake, you know?
Right.
And they were in a comic book, which, interesting fact, these comic books were made specifically for Logan.
Right.
They are not actual comics you can go buy, so that was pretty cool.
Yeah, and so we get to this point, you know, he gets her to the coordinates, and here are all her friends from the photo that she was looking at constantly throughout the movie. Was, as you were saying, you know, it wasn't really Eden. It was just an ideal spot for them to cross over into Canada, right?
Exactly. It was a perfect meeting place. You know, they had a safe haven, and it was hidden because no one knew these coordinates. It was based on a comic book. Where else who's going to find these coordinates? You know? And,
you know, you think that she's got her friends, and you finally get this real strong emotion where you can sense that X-23 is starting to really care for Logan. She doesn't want him to go, and he's just like, you know what, I got the money. Or, you know, he actually didn't even accept the money. He's like, you know what, I'm done. You know, I got you to where you need to go. I'm done losing more people.
And he even says, what else do you want from me? You know, he's arguing with her. Right?
And it was, for me, it was pretty gut-wrenching. She was just like, nothing. I'll be okay. And it's just like, oh.
Yeah, I mean, she really wanted to stay with him, you know. And she even straight up said, you want to die, don't you?
Yeah.
Like, you're done.
Because she found the bullet, the adamantium bullet, and she's like, well, what do you want this for? And, you know, you finally get a sense of his humanity aspect of what this little bullet served, and it was, the way he explained it, was a reminder of what he was.
Yeah.
And then, in some sense, you know, he always thought that maybe he would want to use it on himself. It was a little Man on Fire-esque there.
Yeah, and then he even kind of gave it he even kind of said it like, in a way where he's like, well, I guess I could have also used it to put it in my head.
Right.
And, you know, kind of acknowledging that it's cliche to carry a bullet and shoot yourself in the head, you know, with it. But that was kind of interesting. And I got a sense of that, too. Other movies, like even like The Professional. I've said it since the the first trailer came out, I was like, it's like The Professional, Leon and you know, young Natalie Portman traveling, you know. So that was really cool.
And so we get our final transition to basically the climax of the scene, and this was one of the things that I was kind of confused, and maybe you can clarify, is that Great Vial, that you'll figure out when you watch the movie, is basically an amplification of
their mutant abilities.
Of their mutant abilities, and so, you know, you'll notice that they use it on the clone X-24, and it speeds up his healing process and makes him stronger, but it's only temporary.
Right.
And in small dosages, they implied that it was what, lethal?
It's lethal in large doses, but in small doses, it kind of keeps you going. So I think it was also something the young mutants needed to stay alive, because since they were experiments, they weren't. You couldn't really call them full-fledged mutants,
right.
And this serum is what kept them with their abilities, pretty much.
Right.
And you know and Logan needed it just for the healing factor,
right.
And that was kind of like their thank you gift, you know.
Yeah.
But then we finally realized, you know, that they're discovered. The coordinates were found, and when the kids are trying to get away, I mean, this is all Logan has left. He's out of breath. He can't catch up. How's he gonna do it? He pumps himself full of this liquid.
Steroids are bad.
Don't do it.
No, but you know, this leads into the climax of the movie. You know, the last stand, so to speak.
The last stand. Oh my God.
No, but you know, we get into this whole big battle, and you know, the kids get their redemption on being mistreated throughout the movie. They get their final revenge at the end, and we finally have a showdown between X-24 and Wolverine. And this will be where I make my final comparison between the comic book and the movie. Okay. Is in the comic book, he has a final showdown with, actually, you know, it's not the final showdown, but it's one of them. And he has a big fight with Red Skull, right. And so he still refuses to draw his claws. And what does he finish off Red Skull with? He cuts off his head with Captain America's shield, which is made out of what?
Adamantium
and vibranium. And so, you know, when Wolverine and X-24 are having this final battle, you know, he's got Logan on the ropes and he's about to kill him, and X-23 gets the adamantium bullet and blows his head off. So it's kind of the same thing. You know, you got this guy who got his head cut off with a bit of adamantium, and you got this guy who gets his head blown off.
And it kind of truly becomes a Western by the end of it, because, and you know what? And this is a connection I'm just realizing. In the comic book, Wolverine doesn't want to pop his claws.
Right.
In the film, he never used guns.
Right.
He never wants to use a gun.
Right.
At the end of the film, he uses a gun.
Right.
And it's all he had left. He used every single bit of energy he had to save these kids, with the help of X-23, of course. I mean, she was taking on the clone Wolverine by herself.
Right.
And that was amazing.
Yeah. That was a great scene.
Those acrobatics, I'm like, whoa. But just that final moment where all these kids could get killed, and all the kids realize that Wolverine has this gun, and this is going to be the last stand again. Shit. And Wolverine puts a bullet in Stryker's son and the other guy, and all the kids react, and yeah, I mean, it ends, and that's when we kind of finally see this final touching moment. And you know, and going back to where, you know, a lot of the meat of the film built up at the barn, or at the house, with that family. Patrick Stewart, or Professor Xavier, thinks he's telling Logan, but he's telling the clone that this is what it feels like to have a family, and this is what it feels like to take care for someone, and to have a meal and, you know, enjoy it.
Because they never really had a sense of normalcy. Mm-hmm. You know, there was always an objective, and it was to take care of their own kind. Mm-hmm. You know, they really never had an opportunity to just live.
Yeah.
And so, going into his final days, he finally got to have that feeling. So that's kind of what it means, I guess.
Yeah.
This is what it's like.
And that's what Logan finally gets to see, you know. And he takes his final stand against, you know, the clone, and bullet goes through the head thanks to X-23. And there's no way he's gonna live. He's gonna die. He's bleeding out. He can't heal anymore. And this is where he finally acknowledges that is his daughter. And she's saying "Daddy," and you're like, this, and it tore me up because I have a daughter, you know. And you know, I think I would have been torn up either way, but it's a combination of knowing this is Hugh Jackman's final scene.
Right.
This is the moment where he finally can rest. He can die, and he can say he died doing something noble, saving his daughter, you know, and the fact that he had someone that was there by his side to care for him. So his last words are what Professor X said, and that's this is what it feels like.
Right.
And then and that's it. And man, I was waterfalls, man. Just
you know, and then you get a little extra through his eulogy, and they show him buried, and you got the cross for his grave, and it was the perfect way to end the movie. Perfect way to end the movie. She comes back and she tilts the cross over to make the X, which is such a great send off, because you think about, even from a comic book perspective, who has the most comic book runtime out of most of the, you know, the X-Men? It's Wolverine.
Yeah, even though he wasn't one of the originals, I mean, he has the most runtime. I mean, he's the most popular, most famous.
Right, and throughout the movies, you know, you think about, you got these two side movies. I mean, he's pretty much the only X-Men to really get a dedicated side franchise, you know, aside from X-Men. And even if you think about all the X-Men movies, you know, Days of Future Past, Apocalypse, they still had to give a nod to him.
Yep.
You know, he's the main focal point of this, and that was his good send-off as the last X-Men.
And that's going to be, you know, interesting going forward. You know, Hugh Jackman, I mean, he gave his blessing. He's like, we need another Wolverine. It's time, you know. And I'm interested to see where is it going to go. Are we going to try and survive without Wolverine? Are we ever going to see Hugh Jackman again?
And what are your predictions?
You know, there's so many Hollywood inside deals between companies and productions, and Hugh Jackman, you know, I believe he marketed this, you know, on purpose and put it out there saying, I'll come back if I'm with the Avengers. And that gets people excited. Who doesn't want to see? I mean, think about this though. The new film Infinity War that's coming out with the Avengers. It's $1 billion movie, is what they're estimating.
And it's been split into 3 movies.
And now it's 3 films. So it's like, okay, where can this go? There's still enough room and time to put Hugh Jackman into this and spend another
say that there's a good $30 to $60 million that says that these movies go in a certain direction if someone reprises their role.
Hell yeah. So, I mean, I think they could always tailor it, and he can come back for one final thing if it's right. But if he doesn't, this is perfect send-off. Best, for me, honestly, hands down, I was really thinking about it, best superhero film, hands down, from Marvel, DC, or any other independent.
What movies even come close to this?
Oof. I will say, I mean, going back to the beginning of like Marvel's humble beginnings.
Right.
I mean, when they started trying to make movies, I mean, in the beginning, they were running out of money. A lot of people don't know, they were going bankrupt, so they were selling off their property. They sold Blade to New Line, and they sold Spider-Man to Sony, so they were making money that way.
Worst mistake ever.
Worst mistake ever. I mean, they're kind of coming back, but if you really go back, for me, the Blade franchise was kind of like that first R-rated, like, wow, they took a big jump forward. Like, this is ahead of its time.
Right.
And even though Blade's not my first favorite, Blade 2 is actually my favorite of that franchise.
Right.
I mean, I could say that maybe that comes close to comparison as far as, I mean, it's not really grounded in reality, but it's more emotional. There's not a lot of CGI. It's R-rated. It's gritty. And you have a character that you're building on, you know.
Right.
And Blade has a crazy background himself.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I guess you can go back to something like that, or even Kick-Ass, you know, one of the newer films, you know.
Yeah.
But you know, looking back at some of these films, even like Deadpool, there's a lot more comedy and humor to it, and none of that's in this movie. I mean, and Logan is just relentless, and it's kind of like, I want to say like an ode to real life. It's just, you know, you have to survive it, and you have to keep going.
And like we were saying, you know, it's a superhero movie with substance. It's not so centered around, oh, well, we got to save the world, let's band together, let's stop these guys. It was more of a looking at the humanity aspect of a hero that we don't really get that about.
Yeah.
I mean, we get these subtle implications with the past movies of Wolverine, you know, where he deals with his past, but never have we really sliced it and dissected, okay, well, this is what he feels, and you know, he's with the one person who kind of helped him get past this to the very end.
Yeah, and then you kind of get those hints from like even their inspiration, like Unforgiven, and I believe the movie they were watching, and it was called Shane, the Western they were seeing at the hotel.
Right.
But I mean, for you, what could come close, or is this even your favorite of all superhero films?
I would have to say it's definitely number one, number two for me.
Okay.
And like we were saying, you know, it's one of those things. It's like, had Deadpool have not ever happened, would we be seeing this rated R?
Nope.
You know, it's one of those things where Deadpool, they really took a chance. I mean, Ryan Reynolds funded a lot of this movie himself to take a chance, and you saw how successful that was.
Yeah.
And it was, I mean, you know, there was a lot of jabs that movie took with, you know, him having to fund it himself. You know, they couldn't afford real X-Men. You know, it took a gamble and it paid off.
Yeah.
And it really paved the way for people to say, you know what, let's do this Old Man Logan movie, because this is the type of grittiness that we need to really tell the brutality aspect of what Wolverine,
the true essence,
right? What he really is like, and what he really became, you know, we might not have been seeing this movie had that not happened.
True. I mean, and you know, they jumped the gun with like Blade and even Punisher. I mean, back in when Dolph Lundgren was Punisher, you know. I mean, we can go pretty far back. They kind of jumped into that pretty quickly before they did PG or PG-13 films. But I mean, Wolverine is probably, I honestly feel, probably the only hero that's been in so many PG-13 films that you can make rated R.
Right.
Because of his comic book history too.
Right.
I mean, you can't look at a comic book of Captain America or Spider-Man, and yes, there's brutality in it, and they've gone pretty far with those characters, but I don't think you can make a rated R Spider-Man. You can't make a rated R Captain America.
Right.
So seeing it with him, seeing it with Deadpool, I mean, you can have a fun R-rated film, and you can have something this gritty, you know. And I'm going to say it right now, I want Logan to be on the Oscar contenders list. I'm not going to lie. This has to be an Oscar contenders list for the 2018 run, you know.
I think it had a great soundtrack. You know, you didn't really get a sense of it being a superhero film with it, and it really kind of puts you into the movie.
Yeah. And James Mangold, the director, actually had a nice take on his definition of superhero films, because many people and critics are saying superhero films are like its own genre. And he says, no. If you think about it, each of these films is part of an existing genre, horror, western, whatever, but it has a superhero, you know. So that's what this is. This is a western with Wolverine in it, you know, and Deadpool is a comedy with a hero in it, you know. So like it's kind of a refreshing to hear something like that, and not kind of like just contain it as this is a superhero film.
Right.
So that was cool.
Well, I definitely think this is one of those, part of those, it's going to be exciting to see where we can go from here, because you definitely know that they can make a superhero movie without it really having the, you know, the big explosions and big fight scenes. I mean, you do get a lot of those action scenes, and they're more choreographed to a smaller scale, and I think sometimes that's good.
Yes, and that's what I appreciated a lot about it too. Not a lot of there is some CGI, so little you barely notice it, and it's more of a landscape thing. Right. And that's what I really loved about it too. It's just so grounded. I love it. But 4.5, huh?
4.5.
Great film. Any last thoughts?
I think I'm going to go see it again.
We're definitely going to go see it again, especially in IMAX.
Oh, yes.
I saw it in XD. Very much worth it. I don't have the poster with me, but thank God he went to the opening night, because he brought me that poster. You know, a bunch of comic book artists contributed to different posters, so that was awesome. But yeah, 4.5 rating for us here at NerdFellas. Great film. Make sure you go see it. Also, make sure that you follow, like, subscribe. Let us know your thoughts. What other discussions can we have about Logan? Because this is a film we can talk about for a very long time. Right. Doesn't have to end here. And let us know, what rated R superhero film would you like to see as well?
Maybe what, you know. Yeah, like you said, what superhero movie do you want to see have a rated R rendition?
Yeah, that'd be awesome. So stay tuned for more stuff. I'm Mike.
Suhail.
Thanks for watching NerdFellas, and Nerd out.
See you.